Moscowitz here. Welcome aboard. Uh, I'm expecting Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis to join me shortly. We'll see. He is the author of Esoteric Hollywood. And I am, as mentioned, I'm launching this great experiment of doing live stream, I guess to use the old-fashioned word, radio, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 11 or midnight. Eventually it will be midnight. And that's, of course, Eastern Standard Time. And the unique element of this program is that I can take calls. You can join the program by dialing 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958. The program will officially launch at the 1st of next month, the 1st of the new year. And I'm in the process of developing, I guess you would say it has to be a full media page and website for the program, which includes links to, I believe it's 10 or 12 live stream venues that simultaneously carry the program. Pretty amazing, what you can do in this day and age in terms of that. And also about 25 or 30 venues that carry the archive, either as a video audio or strictly as a podcast audio. And that includes some pretty big players like Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, and just about everyone else that I'm on board with here. So my goal is one of the reasons I want to do the late night show, quite frankly, and again, this is a theory, and it's certainly not something I hope it doesn't become one that's I'm disproved of. And that is that I won't be as censored as I would otherwise be in the regular daytime program, because there's less attention, frankly. There's less clutter. There's less noise. I'm spreading it out over many, many different venues. And so if one gets taken down, maybe the other won't. And I'm going to be in the process, once I get the page established, which is going to be probably any day. It might be as soon as tomorrow. Then I'm going to begin the process of doing outreach to each, excuse me, of the venues to see about building audience in each one of them. So my goal, my understanding, my strategy, and I'm sharing that, is that if one of them goes down, then the other ones won't go down, and the show will go on. My goal is to develop a live, interactive, nightly program where viewers can participate both by doing chats, but more significantly, you can participate by calling in and doing a live appearance. You can be heard. Please keep it in community standards, but you can be heard on this program, and you can interact with yours truly, the host, Charles Moscowitz. 617-396-4958 is the number if you'd like to join the conversation. 617-396-4958. And I am awaiting the arrival, hopefully soon, of Jay Dyer. Let me just see here. Do I have Jay in my system? Yes, I believe I do. I must. I know that I've been back and forth with him. Maybe he's in my, let's see here. Sorry to be fumfering here a bit, but I don't see him in my send chat. Although, I've had situations where people don't show up in the send chat. Doesn't mean I didn't send. Oop, here he is. And here we go. All right, we're joined by Jay Dyer. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
Not at all. I really like your lighting. It's very interesting. It's
Yeah, they came like that, and I thought, well, I'll just leave them like that. There's all these little color things you can slide in and out of there, so I just left it.
well, it's very distinguished, and you've got the great scholarly background, which matches your background. You're a very scholarly fellow. I've been watching your videos.
Thank you.
And I'm launching this late night show. It's going to be Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight, and I'm spreading it out over about 12 different live streams and about 20 other venues, with the hope that the censorship doesn't catch up to me too quickly. This is a big concern right now. We have to talk in euphemisms. We have to spell things. The algorithms, especially some of the things that I want to get into, and I know you like to get into. And maybe at night they won't notice me as much. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting used to all the different codes that we have to use for different things. So now I actually think in the codes, and when I hear people use the normal terms, I don't even realize what they're talking about. I'm so used to the codes and the euphemism.
Well, the reason we have to do that is because I think, and I'm not a tech guy at all. I'm low tech, but that the algorithms actually pick up certain words, and so we have to spell them or use indirection. And if we wanted to talk about, for example, the pandemic, we have to we can mention early treatment over-the-counter drugs that begin with I or that begin with H. We can't say the names of them in the United States. Never mind the fact that the rest of the world is using these drugs very effectively.
Yeah.
And they've been FDA approved 20 years ago, and they're safe and they're effective. We can't talk about them in the United States, because if you do, you're going to be banned. And, everyone knows what we're talking about here. And it brings up a lot of very interesting things that we could talk about indirectly. But you've been doing some very important work on the issue of transhumanism and virtual reality and much of the digitizing of our entire world. When I hear this, I look at it and I realize, at least in my opinion, that there's nothing we can do about that. We're not going to stop that because that's science and that's advancing. But when we put it in the context of some of the other things that we've talked about, like the development of a world order that goes all the way back in modern times, I think, to the Illuminati, but really launched with the French Revolution, and that it's this idea of a small clique of people controlling the entire planet and controlling the high ground in our major institutions, whether they be political, cultural, economic, and even religious. And when we put that into the context of this transhumanism and this high-tech kind of development, we're looking at something that is more dangerous to individual identity and freedom than other things that they've hatched over the past maybe 100 years, such as 2 world wars, such as the Holocaust against the Jews, such as depressions and inflations ripping people off, and all of the other agendas that they've pushed. Because this one is, it's hard. It's not only is it harder to detect, but it gets into the ultimate dream and the ultimate goal of the globalists, and that is to literally physically control every single human being, right down to the most basic. We could talk about brainwashing. We could talk about, propaganda by Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and all of those techniques. He got American people to eat bacon and eggs every day. Fine. But this is much more insidious. I mean, this is like literally physically controlling people with, electronic mechanisms. I don't want to use the word. So I want to go to that, Jay, and I want you to talk a little bit about some of your latest research.
Yeah, I was just reading a book the other day that I got on MK Ultra that I'd not read. I read a lot of those, and this one was going into the history of the microchip. There's our euphemism there. And this was rolled out a long time ago. I'm not exactly sure when the first person was, but the idea was that different areas of the brain could have a electrode placed in order to stimulate different areas related to different motor functions and whatnot. And they tested this, of course, initially with animals. John C. Lilly talks about working with monkeys, and then Then he worked, of course, with the Dolphins famously. And then there used to be on, I don't know if it's still on YouTube anymore. They might have pulled it, but there used to be footage of Jose Delgado with the Bulls and whatnot. And I know Dr. Jolyon West, he did experiments with elephants in the zoo, actually. So then, of course, that was kind of what was public, but they were also doing different experiments privately with people as well. Human experimentation, which of course was illegal, but they did it anyway. And, of course, tyrannical regimes always have a history of doing this because really they see the population as the property of the state. And since you don't have any individual rights, you're the ownership, you're the property of the state. You can see why then, of course, that the ends justify the means, because, well, you're dying for the, greater good of the state when we experiment on you. And so there's this long history of experimentation, of course, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, but then you've got this MK Ultra pattern where they really pioneered the electronic elements of it. In my view, the more that I read on this, the more I see that really it's all kind of one project. I mean, there's different sub projects, but all those different code names of Monarch and Delta and all these, they really relate to the overall plan, I think, of the transhumanist agenda, which you're talking about, which is to perfect what is imperfect in nature, to fix nature, so to speak, and to really be the role of the creator. They would like to be the role of what God is, and have a new race, a new humanity that transcends humanity. And I was just thinking about the parallels between all of that old micro CHIP research in the 40s and 50s, and then the last section of Klaus's book, Fourth Industrial Revolution, where he says that we've really come to the new aeon, the new era, the new stage, where all of that previous research will be rolled out into what he calls synthetic biology. And basically he says rewriting everything. So this is DNA, RNA, this is rewriting, in their view, the biosphere, all of this stuff. So that's the danger here, is not technology, but the misuse of technology for these crazy mad scientist worldviews, basically.
So are you saying they can actually rewrite the DNA of a human being, or create? I mean, in a way, I mean, it gets into some really ugly things like cloning and stuff like that. But
I'm a skeptic on cloning. I don't know, and I really don't know. I reserve judgment because I don't. I mean, there's also in the science world a lot of fraud too. The Lancet covered this a few years ago, which is, of course, the top medical science journal out of Oxford. They did a piece, the editor of the Lancet, about 4 or 5 years ago. You can still find this, where he said that upwards of 50% of or more of scientific papers are in varying degrees fraudulent. So I don't always automatically just believe something because different tech companies claim it or whatever. There's a lot of fraud involved. So I don't know exactly how far they can clone or do anything like that, but I do think that they can at least alter DNA, mutate humans, and maybe in a toxic way. I mean, everybody's seen, mutations from radiation and this kind of stuff. So I suspect that the idea is, through enough research and through enough knowledge, they think that they can somehow perfect man. But
Sure.
Whether they can do that, I that's up for grabs, I guess.
Well, they can't do that because only God is perfect. No human can be perfected. And this is, of course,
I meant cloning.
I know what you mean. I mean, this is the great sin of the Garden of Eden. I mean, the idea that man can know all things, and that's why at least metaphorically, our forefathers and mothers were banned from the garden. And in more modern times, I mean, we're talking about a neo-evolutionary movement, in that, the Darwinian idea of the mid-19th century, which hit the establishment like a thunderclap. I mean, he became the apostle of the future, the secular leader, was that man is nothing more than a bag of bones that can be evolved through breeding and through creating a superior race or species. And Darwin did use the word race in both of his books. And he did view the Anglo-Saxons as a superior race, even to the Irish, apparently. And that people, and it makes sense if you look at evolution, that would be the case, because if man is evolving into a superior being and eventually out pops a new species, then you're going to have various groups of people around the world who are more evolved than others. That would be the logical science. Now, this pseudoscience eventually got into a more advanced stage pretty much around the time of World War II, and we had the Nazi experiments, and most of those Nazi doctors got off with just a slap on the wrist, I should note, including Mengele, who died in his home in Argentina in the 1970s. And then you had in the United States MK Ultra, as you mentioned, and this is something that is public record. It came out in the church committee hearings of the late 1970s. That combined with the British Tavistock Institute, Canada had something going on with this, where they really did start to try to evolve a new kind of man. And they did do human experiments. We can't really talk about that because it's still a super sensitive subject. But the fact is that, I mean, there was a reporter that I interviewed years ago, Jim Keith. I don't know if you know who he is. He,
in fact, I was just reading his book. I've read three of his books, and the one I hadn't read was his analysis of the alternative three, which I think was a psychological operation. But there's a great chapter in that one on MK Ultra, and that's specifically what I was talking about.
Right, and he came on my program years ago. I don't want to go into it. He died under mysterious and rather questionable circumstances, right? Mm-hmm. And he was a pretty straightforward reporter. He wasn't particularly ideological. He just was doing research. He was a journalist student, and he began to really uncover the MK Ultra story. And Jolyon West and Cameron at McGill University and all the rest. And these people were doing just heinous and horrendous human experiments on trying to manipulate human consciousness and the human being. And of course, that coincided with the Soviet Union's program of psyops. Mm-hmm. And now it's reaching a point where these people who have this kind of messianic view of themselves as being able to replace God and become, develop a new human, they have some of the tools now that really can do some serious damage. I mean, I saw you mention recently in a talk Ray Kurzweil, who's over here at MIT, and I've interviewed a couple of people from the Kurzweil Institute, and these people are like cult followers. I mean, they come on there, their eyes are all glassy. I mean, it looks like, it's like, it reminds me of remember the Bebop cult, whatever the heck that was, right?
Oh, the Heaven's Gate.
Yeah. I mean, which was another one of these sort of things.
Yes.
And they're like, we are going to create a new kind of a human being that is going to combine both biological and mechanical and technical elements. And that these implants, if you will, and other factors, they are going to monitor every aspect of your health, your heartbeat, your weight, your sleep patterns, your brain, and they're going to feed the information into some gigantic brain somewhere, and it's going to give you perpetual health and and cosmic consciousness. I mean, this is sort of the vision of Blavatsky and the whole internet, that whole group of theosophy, that man would become superhuman. Sounds to me like the Ubermensch, of course, right, where you'd live to be 200 years old, you'd have perfect health, and you'd have cosmic consciousness. And they really are, and this is not a joke over there at MIT. I mean, these guys are publishing papers. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was into this thing big time. Yeah. He had a private office apparently at Harvard. Right. And I mean, I feel nervous talking about this because I'm going to turn on my computer tomorrow and find out that the whole show has been taken away. I just want to say that's true. I mean, it's, we just don't know, I'll be sitting on Spielkes wondering, are they going to knock? Am I going to be, airbrushed off the page? Okay. I just want to say that as I get into this. But I guess what we're talking about here, Jay, is something that most normies have no idea about. And it is, when they hear me talk about this, they look at me like I've got horns because no one's exposed to what's going on here. This is a real thing. You can look up at MIT. transhumanism, and there are a lot of published papers which say exactly what I'm saying here. The Kurzweil Institute is a real deal. Ray Kurzweil started out good. You know, he said he created the talking book for Stevie Wonder, right? Mm-hmm. Beautiful and brilliant experiment. You could put a book in it, and the book would be read. Mm-hmm. Now he's into this unbelievably sort of sci-fi fact stuff, and there's a lot of money behind it, and it is really trying to develop a new world.
Yes, I had heard of his material from the Bill Joy essay, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, because at the beginning of that famous essay that he wrote back in 2000, he says, I had this discussion with the famous philosopher John Searle from Berkeley and Ray Kurzweil at some event, and we were debating about whether machines can become conscious. And he says, Kurzweil presented the argument, said it's inevitable because of the rapid advance of technology. Of course, just because technology is advancing doesn't mean that the algorithms are becoming conscious. I think that's kind of silly, but that's right. What most people are believing who believe in that narrative. And you're absolutely right that it fits into the Darwinian narrative, because the assumption is, well, which is weird because not all the Darwinists even believe this, but well, if we're evolving in some progressive, complex way, like to become more and more complex from, just a single cell to what we are now, then doesn't it stand to reason that we'll keep evolving into being these, space god superheroes, right?
Right.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that's assuming that the evolution story is true to begin with, and even if it is, which I don't think it is, but even if it was, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to that you will become some sort of
it won't happen. I mean,
right.
First of all, a computer cannot have consciousness,
right?
Because only a living being, a sentient being, and a human being can have consciousness. Animals don't have the same consciousness. They're emotional beings who are tied to nature. The human being has consciousness because we have the ability to reason, and a computer cannot reason. It can replicate reason that had been put into it by human beings.
Yeah.
And it can do it probably better than a human being in certain ways, because it can store millions and millions of pieces of data and call it up at a snap. But it cannot actually think. It cannot actually imagine or create or invent. All it can do is replicate knowledge that was fed to it, which of course gets into a very scary prospect here, because while they're not going to succeed in terms of creating a new human being, because that's not possible, they will. There are side elements to this that are very dangerous in terms of control of people through algorithms and through computer databases that can know everything about you. And this is some of the stuff that was actually, and that they're, coordinating that. There have been a few whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and others who've shown what's going on with that. What's going on with some of that stuff, Jay, in terms of, the world sort of coming under the rubric of one gigantic electronic brain that knows every little thing we've ever done?
Well, there was so in that Bill Joy essay, when he referenced some of the books that he had read a long time ago from Kurzweil, I went and I got the Kurzweil books finally, because I had never gotten around to it. I'd heard him talk. I watched his documentary a long time ago, and I'd read some of those blog posts that he would do on his website, but I never actually read the books. And so it was interesting to compare what he'd written in 2000 in The Age of Spiritual Machines, and then what he wrote in 2006 with the Singularity book. But both books really present a timeline of where, he's projecting things to go. And there's this specific section that was really troubling where, because I was researching the metaverse, and there's a section where he talks about VR, and he says that what he thinks VR will become is a situation where, rather than it being augmented reality, it will move to being a purely virtual reality, and then it will move to where you don't even have to link through a device. It'll be a direct link. And he projects that they would be able to basically step in between your brain's consciousness of the external world and stimuli to basically replace that, to put in any stimuli that they want. And he portrayed it like it was a good idea, like, oh, this will be great because you can go into this world and you can, be who you want to be and it'll be fun. But then it was like, but it's also dangerous because you could have your experiences replaced and you can have beamed at you what they want you to experience. And thus you could be mind controlled by believing that you had emotions and experiences that you never had. I mean, that's at least what he projects in the next 20 years. So that's not right now, but that kind of a thing, I could see that being very real. I'm like I said, a skeptic of the cloning and that kind of stuff. But that kind of a situation is exactly what the dangers of MKUltra would present, is moving the technology away from micro CHIP to nano, and then the nano being the thing that controls the inputs to your brain and gives you the experiences from some, wireless computer somewhere that's telling you that you're seeing and hearing this. And that's just perfect mind control there.
Now, I don't know if you're getting into this, but does this have to do with the new Facebook meta system that, I'd be careful to criticize Facebook. They're carrying the show right now live on my Facebook page, as is Twitter and as is LinkedIn and about 10 other people. So I'm really putting together, I mean, it's amazing what you can do, but at the same time, this meta thing, as you've described it pretty well. I mean, it's dealing with almost like a complete total immersion into an alternative reality. I remember this was years ago because I live in Boston, and MIT was doing this experiment where they had students walking around with these gigantic glasses, and they would keep them on all day, and they were seeing everything, flashing before them, and they were like integrating knowledge, and it was putting stuff in. I didn't hear much about it after this, and this was in the 90s. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's continued on in terms of developing what's now being done by Facebook, and it's really a worldwide system, and I think that it taps into the emotional side of things, as Facebook does, and very deleteriously in many ways. In terms of, especially with the younger people, where you become, it changes. We don't know the long-term effects, but we don't know what it's going to do to not just society, but to actual behavior amongst younger people in terms of how they perceive the world. And it's becoming very intimate, firstly with the smartphone, which everyone carries. And if you take away someone's smartphone, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they go into a panic. It's like it's becoming like a religious item, and it's almost like you can't part with it, and that's like a next step towards something that's a little bit more inside a person. Let's just put it that way. And I saw some interesting quotes recently from the papers of Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was one of the first modern globalists. He's very much the avatar, one of them, of this whole internationalist movement. He was a close advisor to Woodrow Wilson. He was one of the architects of America's entry into World War I. And, he spoke openly about a new world order in a fictional book he wrote called Dr. Drew Administrator, where you'd have a fascist dictator ruling the Western Hemisphere. And in these papers, he said, we're going to have a medical event, like which makes me think of the pandemic. There's going to be something that's going to happen in the world that is going to lead toward a new assessment of sovereignty and individual rights, and that people are going to have to put the protection against this thing over individual freedom if they want to live. Sounds a little bit like what's going on now, and it sounds a little bit like what's going on with, again, I want to be careful here, but, the sort of the forced injections and the forced documents one has to carry and all of that good stuff. What say you?
Yeah, I noticed a few, so some of the globalist internationalist writers had been talking about using medicine as a way to kind of slide the coming global order into the back door. Friedrich Capra has multiple chapters in his book, Turning Point, where he says that the agenda will basically come about through medicine. If I recall, the day tapes discussed medicine being a key way that this would be brought in. And then the recent white paper that I covered was the Silent Weapons for Quiet War document, which appears to come from somebody at a high Raytheon Boeing type of level. It seems like it's written probably by a former military person who had gone into engineering, and it's pretty amazing what's in that document, because it's basically just saying that this is all a corporate takeover to literally have a total dictatorship of medical technocratic control. And they say that the nation state has to go away, family has to go away, all those things are going to be destroyed. It doesn't mention a pandemic. It does mention basically more gradual locking down of everybody in the economy, an economic collapse. It mentions basically forced chip type things. It mentions a lot of things as what they would try to do in the next several decades. And that document was 1979. Mm-hmm. And they said that this war was declared officially on the part of these corporate elite at the Harvard Research Project, what they called it, in 1954. So from the time of 1954 to 1979, they had studied all these energy dynamics to see how to basically destroy other energy systems. And the family unit is an energy system that can be destroyed, it says, as well as the national economy being an energy system. And they even said that the nation state itself has to be destroyed because that's a firewall to this global international clique. It's just amazing. It was one of the most forthright documents, and I would say that you could be skeptical of it if so much of it hadn't come true. Kind of like the day tapes, since they're kind of like secondhand, we don't know where they came from. They're kind of been floating out there for a long time. But when I compare that to, the writings that we've been analyzing over the last 5 years, 50 or so different key, global elite texts, mm-hmm. It lines up perfectly with it. So to me, that's enough of a confirmation. I mean, it's basically saying everything that all the other global elites say. So I would say this is a legitimate white paper document that really does outline what they're trying to do, and it says exactly what you had just said. It doesn't necessarily use that word, but then you can fast forward all the way up to lockstep. Well, it's actually called the future scenarios document. It's 4 different scenarios, but I read that whole document too, and it says the exact same thing. So we noticed that, and that's a real document. Nobody disputes that one. I mean, that the lockstep scenario outlines very clearly, I think, what's happened in the last 5 years or 3 years. So there's also the SPARS document. There's also the Cladex experiment. There's Crimson Contagion, Dark Winter. All of these things really kind of go together, and you see the same patterns over and over of roll out the fear, and basically the population has to be convinced that security is way more important than any kind of liberties. And they all say that. And what could be more secure, a sense of fear than the medicine. Possibility you're going to catch this dread disease. Exactly. I mean, the easiest way to scare everybody, they decided, was the medical angle. Exactly.
And I think that I've looked at Aldous Huxley's famous book Brave New World, but what people don't know is that he gave an interview shortly before he committed suicide on November 22nd, 1963. And he filmed his suicide. It was the same day that Kennedy was assassinated. And he was expecting this to be big news, front page news, but it was obviously wiped off the page because of more bigger events. But he talked about a world chemical concentration camp by means of people taking various controlled substances. And he also was, I think he was a contemporary of Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and those guys who had CIA connections. And you mentioned Jolyon West, who was handing out LSD tabs in Los Angeles on the street. And, we should look, this isn't, some nutty conspiracy. Take a look at the world right now, especially the industrialized Western world, and ask how many people are on a controlled substance. I would say probably more than half. You're taking some kind of mind-altering substance. Now you have the legalization of CBD. It's everywhere. You go into 7-Eleven and you can buy gum and candy with it. everyone is, involved in various mind-altering stuff. And it's he talked about this as in the context of a world control. He was very much I think he was a whistleblower at the end of his life. And he was very much a part of this whole movement. I mean, his brother, Julian Huxley, was the founder of UNESCO, which was supposed to be the World School Board. And he talked about evolutionary, religion that would replace the world religions without naming it. In other words, they'd leave in place the functionality of various religions. You still have the ceremony and the trappings, but the philosophy, the belief, the theology would be replaced by this evolutionary humanism, I think he called it.
And don't forget too that he wrote that famous philosophy of UNESCO. If you read the philosophy of UNESCO essay, he basically says that the theology, the religio philosophy of German National Socialism is correct, but it's not PC. It has to be reworded to no longer be eugenics and dysgenics. He says something like it. We'll have to use the word biometrics or something like that. So, right. and then he coins the term. He coins the term transhumanism.
Yeah.
Then he coins transhumanism. He says that really that's the cloak for that older model of, we can't talk about it the way that the National Socialists thought about it. We'll reword it and make it biometrics and transhumanism, but it's the same thing.
Right. I mean, he just basically refashioned eugenics after World War II, when it obviously had such a bad stench because of what happened with the Nazis. And we should note also that both of their grandfather was T.E. Huxley, who was the main promoter of Darwin in 1858, and who had very famous debates with Christian ministers, and where he mocked and criticized the Bible. So, this is maybe you could say as part of this sort of British international imperialist system that was furthered by Cecil Rhodes, and that was written about by Carol Quigley in Tragedy and Hope.
Speaking of that, I also just got that book. You probably heard of it, Dope Inc.
I've heard of it. Isn't that was that Eustace Mullins?
No, it's Lyndon LaRouche. Which I'm not a huge fan of Lyndon LaRouche, but that's a book that's good for showing the way the British Empire basically weaponized opium and all that. Oh yeah. And then it ties it into the intelligence apparatus and how that's a type of warfare. And so I think that Huxley probably had seen that that's the way the British Empire was able to weaponize opium. And so he was kind of projecting and saying that with pharmacology, they'll probably weaponize, drugs to narcotics or whatever, hallucinogens, or combine them or whatever. They'll weaponize it to where they'll give everybody some kind of mind altering substance, which that's, in other words, I'm just saying that I've been meaning for years to read Doping. I never got around to it, but I noticed that Huxley was probably influenced by that. And then I think we talked about it before, that some people think too that maybe even Crowley had been experimenting as a kind of a predecessor to even Huxley, because he wrote these drug diaries that some people think might have been used by British intelligence as well. So I think the British Empire had probably known, even before Huxley, that this was a, really powerful type of weapon that can be used on society. And anyway, that just made me think.
No, I mean, it's interesting. And I think that it's, politically speaking, it's safe to say that the British Empire, if you will, has combined with the elites of other nations, including the United States and France and possibly Russia, and a lot of that was the legacy of Cecil Rhodes and his roundtable, which eventually became the Council on Foreign Relations and the British Royal Institute of International Affairs. And their idea was to create a world order of informal rulers who were not elected people, not people in the front, who would manipulate political, economic, and spiritual ideas, and who would encourage perpetual war and perpetual conflict, and would divide societies based on, kind of dialectical lines, and then fanning the flames of those lines. I kind of get into this in my own book now, which is Sociology for Conservatives. But to bring things up, I mean, these are real cheerful subjects, aren't they?
Oh, by the way, you just reminded me of another. So I found this really obscure guy's book on MK Ultra. It's a little book about 60, 70 pages. MK Ultra and history of MK Ultra in Australia. I can't remember the guy's name, but and I didn't even know that there was this whole other series of projects going on in Australia where they were doing a lot of things that I guess they could get away with because it wasn't on US land and they were doing it over there. But there was one of the people involved in that was the other Huxley. So I didn't even realize there was a third Huxley, and he was running a lot of the MK Ultra operations in Australia.
Right. And we can't even talk about what's going on in Australia right now.
Right.
But it's not good. It's not pretty. And there's not a lot of freedom, frankly, right now there. Jay, what can we do? I mean, we're like, as citizens, as conscious individuals who hope to have control over our own lives and our own destinies, who believe in God, who believe in that there is a moral and ethical code that exists outside of human nature, and that that wants to preserve the American philosophy, the American political philosophy, which is the rights come from the creator and not from the state. What can we do?
I'm actually optimistic because even though things are pretty dark right now, I actually think that there's a two-sided effect to that, because as things get darker, more and more people realize how serious it is, how real all this is. It's not theories. This is all just in your face every day. And I'm afraid that it's going to get even worse, but I mean, maybe not, maybe things will start to lighten up. I don't know, but I think that they're going to, everything that they've done in the last few months was pretty predictable. I think we all expected the variation that has come out. I think a lot of us expected them to try to push, but they're suppressing, large rallies. At least the media is not covering huge rallies all over the world over this stuff. Yeah. So that's good news. I think the majority of the people are against this and they want freedom. They don't want this nonsense. It's going to be crazy. And people are seeing and hearing what's going on in down under. So I'm optimistic, actually. I think what we can do is keep doing what we're doing, waking people up. The worse things get, more people will wake up. But I ultimately think that no, God is in control, and I don't think this is going to work. All these tyrannical emperors and dictators, they go crazy. So they're their own worst enemies.
Literally,
they go nuts. They're their own worst enemies, and they really basically just lose control of themselves.
Yeah, but look at the damage they do before they get to that. I mean, it's that's the question. I mean, we are waking up in the world, but the question is how much damage, how bad is it going to get?
That's right.
In the process, and that this is an ongoing struggle. Every generation deals with people who are plotting to take over the world and who are trying to replace God with themselves, and who have power and who how to use the power to interconnect with other people of power. And really the only question is, how can we keep them in check? It's always going to be here. We're never going to have, that's not going to change. Power corrupts. What is it? Lord Acton, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why in this country we developed this brilliant system of checks and balances, which didn't work in this last election. Let's not go into that. But we have. I'm optimistic too. I mean, we have many successes. We've had the development of national sovereignty and nationalism in a good way, around the world, and I think that. I heard this interesting little piece of information recently. I interviewed a Chinese dissident who told me that Christianity is taking off in China, and China's like Rome. One day the emperor woke up and he realized that the entire empire had become Christian. And then Constantine basically threw in the towel and said, great. And that was a great advancement in human civilization. It's happening in China, and the same phenomenon may happen. It may not happen this year, but there is a building awareness of people that rights come from God, not from the state. And also, this is something, I don't know if you know anything about this, and I heard Dinesh D'Souza talk about this, and then I checked it out in a couple of other interviews. Apparently, there's this phenomena occurring in the Islamic world right now, particularly in Africa and Asia, where millions of people are converting to Christianity, and when probably I would assume Eastern Christianity. And what's happening is that they're having a dream, and in that dream, a man with white robes comes to them with a luminous face, and he says, "I love you, and I died for you." Now we know who that is. I mean, I'm not Christian myself, but I understand what that's about. And people are then going to the churches and saying, "I've seen this, and what is going on here?" And the result is, and Al Jazeera has reported that in the past 4 or 5 years, 6 million people in Asia and Africa have converted to Christianity. And it's
I didn't realize it was that many. I've heard some of these stories,
Yeah.
but I didn't realize it was that many people.
It's unprecedented in Islamic history because in Islam, nobody ever converts out. I mean, it's very rare. It's the kind of thing where, I mean, you could risk your life. I mean, you're in it. So these things, I mean, this is, it's at this point somewhat anecdotal, but it's interesting to watch. And these are developments, I think, that are positive in terms of people becoming aware of who they are on this earth and their own power as individuals in their ability to know themselves and to control their destiny. And this is a huge threat to this globalist, internationalist, amoral agenda that seeks to control the world for our own good, allegedly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to look into that. I didn't even know. Again, like I said, it was that many people, and that's fascinating. But yeah, I don't know that, God's providence is wild in the sense that there's always something like that going on at the same time as there's all these evil things going on. And so I've noticed, we deal a lot with atheists and people that are, very hostile. Had a lot of interaction. I didn't know a lot about Islam until the last couple of years. So I'm not by any means an expert. So I've learned a lot about Islam in the last couple of years. And we've seen quite a few people, start to question it. Seen a lot of atheists start to question things. So I think when things get bad, it kind of forces people to realize, hey, maybe good and evil are real. Maybe it's not all made up. Maybe there's some real, truth to this. So it kind of forces people that wouldn't necessarily have done otherwise wouldn't have asked these kinds of questions to kind of come to grips with, well, what is the purpose of life? Where are we going? Maybe religion actually has a key function in society. We can't build these secular societies that don't have religion, that don't have morals, that don't have objective ethics, because they fall apart, and you basically just automatically become a ward of the state. And if America collapses, it's going to be even worse for the rest of the world. Number one, obviously the third world will be affected. A lot of people are going to die if America falls apart. I'm worried that they will try to have an economic collapse. I know that a lot of the global elites have hinted at and discussed economic collapse. I know that Klaus has run these exercises like Cyber Polygon, where they hope to kind of, I view it as a potential false FLAG event where it's a cyber fake flag,
right?
And they might try to, in a cyber way, wreck things to further bring in the reset or whatever. And that's really what that Cyber Polygon exercise was about. I went and read the whole document, but so I think that those things are going to, even if it gets that bad, it's still going to force people to, kind of take inventory of our lives and, good and evil and all that kind of stuff.
Talk a little bit about the Great Reset. You're one of the cutting edge people exposing this agenda, and Klaus Schwab and the Fourth Revolution and the meeting in Davos where they actually talked about how to harness the power of the disease and its international impact politically.
Right. So the head of this is, as you know, Klaus Schwab. He used to be steering member committee guy of Bilderberg. So Bilderberg is another one of these sort of international corporate elite confabs. Bilderberg was set up first by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who himself was former SS comes from a former SS
Yeah.
background. And so David Rockefeller, for example, in his memoirs has a whole chapter on Bilderberg and internationalism. And he really just admits all of this as well. He said he actually kind of doesn't have as positive an appraisal of Bilderberg as I would have thought. He basically says that he liked it, had some good ideas, but it wasn't really his vision. Not to excuse David Rockefeller, because he was overall an attendee and a supporter, but sometimes the global elite people disagree amongst themselves and they have different plans and different strategies. But Klaus comes out of that clique, and so the World Economic Forum is like a more kind of public liberal face to that kind of inner Bilderberg clique. And so you get a lot of Hollywood people. You get like Kevin Spacey went a few years ago, and he was the king of Davos, a few years ago before he got into a lot of media trouble. Leonardo DiCaprio goes. So basically everybody that's in on the sort of the green agenda and the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, it's all these kind of really wealthy limousine liberals, the champagne socialist types, they go. And so I didn't really realize that would kind of be the spearhead of what would be pushing all of this, 5 or 6 years ago when I first started reading and researching Davos. I'd made some videos maybe in about 2018, 17, 18. So, and I noticed they were attacking Trump really hard. They really hated him and made fun. And I was like, well, why do they even care? And so I got deeper and deeper into that and looked at that whole thing. And it's just really, another one of these kind of global elite meetings. But then they, for whatever reason, they stepped forward, I guess, to be the face of the Great Reset. There was a lot of podcasts and interviews and discussions by Prince Charles. He was pushing the same stuff in the last few years. He went on the, World Economic Forum podcast several times. So I listened to all those and I was like, this is crazy. And they had put up this specific page only for members. This was back in 2020. And it was actually all set up and designed before the events of the COOF, we'll say.
Yes.
So before the COOF was a big PANDEMIC, they had this huge website organized where it was like a circle and it was all the areas of life. And you could go and you could click into each little section and it would pull up a whole other circle of how. So basically every area of life, every area of the economy, every area of technology, education, they had it modeled out how the Great Reset would be rolled out to reset everything. And as you know from the history of the French Revolution, the revolutionaries, they had this idea, the Jacobins had this idea of year zero to basically reset everything. So this is an older Jacobin idea that you can literally just start over from scratch, like start all civilization over, wipe it all away, and start from anew. And that's precisely what this is. And that people think that they don't understand that that's what it is. They think, oh, there's some bunch of rich people somewhere that meet and they try to make things better. No, it's an elite clique directly tied into Mr. GATES, right?
Yes.
All the other usual suspects. And they're very open about their agenda. That was what was so surprising. Klaus's Fourth Industrial Revolution book, that came out prior to the events of 2020 as well. And then he put out his book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, where he basically says, let's use this to bring all of this in. So it's literally
very open.
Yeah, literally like a statement of resetting civilization to make it the technocracy. That's the craziest part is that last section of the Fourth Industrial Revolution where he says we're going to roll out Internet of Things, we're going to roll out Skynet, basically we're going to roll out everything to track, trace everything, control everything. This is the nightmare circular economy. It's like communism run by robots is what his vision is. And so they're going to tell you how much water you can have. You're going to eat bugs. You're not going to have meat. You're going to have to. It's literally all the dystopia movies.
We're not talking some conspiracy theory here. This is in his book. This is very out in the open. This is they have their annual event at Davos, which is attended by, as you say, world figures, world leaders, both in culture and in politics. and that they think that they're openly saying that the sovereignty of the United States has to be knocked down a few pegs, and that we have to no longer eat meat, and we have to they kind of mix in and they marvel in the whole global warming stuff, and the world is going to burn to a cinder, and we have to do this whole emergency. And I think that another little wrinkle to it is that we might have an invasion from aliens from outer space. Maybe
Klaus, actually, there's a World Economic Forum, Davos, a video that they put out with 8 things to expect the next 10 years, and one is aliens.
Yeah. I mean, these are all things that were cooked up to scare the hell out of everyone and further get us to reject, freedom and to kind of withdraw into ourselves. I think that there's an attempt to divide people into 2 camps. That has to do with a medical procedure that we're not going to name, and that people who are not going to participate in this wonderful procedure, and I'm not criticizing the thing itself. I've actually had it. All right. I mean, so it's what it is. That they're going to be another kind of citizen. They're going to not have the proper ID. It goes to the Chinese social score. This is something that big tech is tinkering with. They certainly are doing it in China, where if you don't have a high enough score, you don't get to do normal things that everyone else gets to do. You become like a marginalized person, very much like what the Nazis did to the Jews.
Well, we bought a generator and we bought some storable food. So I never really thought I would be like a prepper. I don't know that I would say I'm necessarily a prepper, but I felt like I might as well. I mean, I mean, 3 years ago, I would have been like, oh, come on, that's too far. I mean, I read a lot of these global elite books, but I thought, they're going to try this, 20 years from now. No, they're doing it now.
Here.
So
it's here.
Yeah,
it's here, and we people can no longer laugh at the preppers because everyone knows that you have to do that. And look, there are some positive elements to this experience. One of them is that there's more homeschooling. I can just think of my dear friend, the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who wrote a whole shelf of books on this topic. I wish he was here to talk about it. And because of homeschooling and because of people watching what their children are learning on Zoom, they're getting a little glimpse into the National Education Association classroom and seeing things like critical theory and, other, sexual stuff that's pretty graphic. And they're saying, hey, we're not going to have it. And now you have school boards being overthrown all over the country. And there's a huge reaction to it. I think it had everything to do with the recent election in Virginia. And so these are good things, and this is not ideological. You've got people from all sides of the political spectrum because you have mothers and fathers who care about their children. So, these are, pivotal events that we can learn from, that we can develop an awareness of where we are in society and the condition of our freedom. So,
yes, couldn't agree more. And I think that the more that we can return to maybe more, I hesitate to use the word organic, more healthier ways of living. I mean, I live in the country. Not everybody has to live in the country. I live in the country. We have a generator. We have storable food. I think things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, those are all good things.
Right. Real assets.
Other than that, I mean, like the more you can be off of the grid, the better, because the more that you're on the grid, the more you're subjected to the technocracies, tracking, tracing. You're not going to be able to ride the subway. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. They're going to keep pushing further and further with that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't want to live in a giant city, but that's other people's decisions. That's just
no, I understand. Personal... I mean, I'm in the city, but I've certainly have done some prepping, and I take a fistful of supplements, and I'm very careful with diet. And this, you have to kind of think about GMOs and how food is created,
exactly,
and how it's been depleted and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, we can start to take responsibility for our own our own sovereignty as individuals, which is a reflection of the importance of national sovereignty. Jay, what do you, what are you up to in terms of letting my listeners and viewers know where they can watch your show and learn about your books and what you're up to?
Yeah, my website's Jay's Analysis. You can go there for the lectures, the videos, the interviews. There's a long back catalog going back about 5 years. And there's a lot of movie analyses. I do a lot of philosophical, movie analyses. So the books are available there at the website. So that way we don't pay Jeff Bezos money. If you want to support, get the book from me. I do sign copies. And then about once every week or two, I host the 4th hour of ALEXJONES's show.
Yes, he's doing a great job.
Thanks. Then what else have we been doing? That's all I can think of. Just the normal places on social media until I get, I expect any day to be gone from those as well. But I'm also on some other free speech type websites like Rockfin, which has been a good platform for not, censoring anybody.
I also noticed that there's this platform that a lot of journalists that are being censored, like I think Glenn Greenwald and some others, this show stack or something like that, which they were all going on. How Substack, yeah. Which is
I've heard of that. I haven't tried it yet, but
right.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So your scholarship is pretty broad and pretty deep, and I've been following areas you've gotten into in religion and in politics that are incredible. There's so much more we could talk about. I'd like to, have you back from time to time to do that and develop that, especially as I roll out my live show. And so, Jay Dyer, I want to thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Charles. Much appreciated.
Pleasure and an honor. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Likewise. Have a good